Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday, the 11th of November here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Donald Trump begins handing out key jobs in his administration, as reports say he's now spoken directly with Putin.
Wall Street giants warn the bond market volatility unleashed by Donald Trump's victory may be far from over.
Plus, Germany's Olaf Scholz opens the door to an earlier election as the country's opposition leader says he would look to ink deals with President-elect Trump.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Donald Trump has announced some key appointments to his administration's top team. Former US Immigration and Customs Enforcement Director Tom Homan will be his new border czar. Homan was the public face of Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policies during his first term in office. The president-elect is also nominating New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik to join his administration as US ambassador to the United Nations. In a statement, the president-elect told the New York Post, quote, "Elise is an incredibly strong, tough and smart America First fighter. She's currently the fourth ranking Republican in the House, and her appointment would bring one of Trump's highest profile congressional allies into the administration." These appointments come as sources have told Bloomberg that Trump intends to narrow the shortlist of candidates for Treasury Secretary this week. He's understood to be leaning towards someone with a Wall Street pedigree for the job, with Howard Lutnick, John Paulson and Scott Bessent all possibilities.
Well, US President-elect Trump has reportedly told Russia's Vladimir Putin not to escalate the war in Ukraine and reminded him of the sizable US military presence in Europe. According to the Washington Post, the comments were made in a call on Thursday between the two men. The reports come as White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said President Biden will argue for continued US aid to Ukraine during the transition to the new administration. Here's what he told CBS's Face the Nation.
Of course, President Biden will have the opportunity over the next 70 days to make the case to the Congress and to the incoming administration that the United States should not walk away from Ukraine, that walking away from Ukraine means more instability in Europe. And ultimately, as the Japanese Prime Minister said, if we walk away from Ukraine in Europe, the question about America's commitment to our allies in Asia will grow.
Sullivan's comments come as Trump's election victory and Republican control of potentially both houses of Congress raise questions about the future of US aid for Ukraine to defend against Russia's invasion.
Firms including BlackRock and JPMorgan are warning that bond market volatility triggered by Donald Trump's presidential victory is likely far from over. Traders fear that the likelihood that Trump will cut taxes and throw up large tariffs will rekindle inflation by raising import costs and pouring stimulus on an already strong economy. Here's Bloomberg's markets live strategist Mark Cranfield.
I think that the Treasury bond market is really going to have a very interesting period in the next few weeks. There's been an assumption that the Federal Reserve will be cutting interest rates well into next year, and yet now that is very much in doubt. Although for now the pricing still suggests that traders think there's a chance of December for another rate cut from the Federal Reserve, 2025 is looking very uncertain in that respect. We had the Fed's Kashkari speaking over the weekend. He's a bit more concerned about the inflation outlook, and I think you will see more and more Fed speakers in the next couple of weeks hinting that inflation has become their biggest factor again. It was employment for a while, and it looks like they're going to switch back to inflation.
That view from Mark Cranfield has increasingly been seen in market bets. Swaps traders are now pricing in that Federal Reserve policymakers will reduce their benchmark rate to 4% by mid-2025. That's a full percentage point higher than they were predicting in September.
Bitcoin's value has surged above $81,000 for the first time, boosted by President-elect Donald Trump's embrace of digital assets. And Bitcoin has soared by 94% in value so far in 2024. This morning, currently trading at $80,920. Now, on the campaign trail, Trump vowed to put the US at the centre of the digital asset industry and pledged to fire the Securities and Exchange Commission chair, Gary Gensler, who repeatedly labelled the sector as rife with fraud and misconduct. A host of smaller cryptocurrencies have even outperformed Bitcoin. The likes of Elon Musk promoted Dogecoin, which is up 50% in the past 5 days. But hedge funds clinging on to bets against Musk's Tesla have lost billions of dollars. Hedge funds that had short positions against Tesla between Election Day last week and Friday's close took an on-paper hit of at least $5.2 billion, according to Bloomberg calculations based on S3 Partners data.
Germany's opposition leader Friedrich Merz says he'd look to do deals with the incoming US president. The head of the right-wing, of the centre-right Christian Democratic Union currently dominates the polls ahead of a potential election. Merz told Stern magazine that Germany has not, quote, articulated and enforced our interests well enough and that it shouldn't end with only one side profiting. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is under widespread political pressure to bring forward the date of an early election after his coalition collapsed last week.
Here in the UK, Rachel Reeves is setting out her vision for the financial sector and how she'll drive growth. The UK Chancellor is under pressure after setting out a budget with ambitious fiscal targets. Bloomberg's City editor, Catherine Griffiths, says that reforming the pensions sector is now a key target.
There's billions and billions and billions of pounds in pension pots in the UK. This point that, yes, we want overseas investors coming into the UK, but actually in the UK itself, there's a lot of money sitting in savings funds, and how we try to deploy that money in a way that's both good for the owners of the money, but also, of course, how that money can be used in a more productive way in the British economy.
That was Bloomberg's City editor Catherine Griffiths there, who is also watching for big changes to Britain's financial regulators in a speech this Thursday from Chancellor Rachel Reeves. She is likely to back free trade, which may put her government at odds with the new US administration's tariff ambitions.
And the UK's hospitality sector says businesses are facing drastic job cuts. An open letter signed by more than 200 bosses in the sector says tax hikes announced in the budget will cost the industry billions. Bloomberg's James Woolcock has more.
Some of hospitality's biggest names are making a very public warning to the Chancellor. The likes of Whitbread, Hyatt Hotels, Green King, all well-known chains with tens of thousands of workers in the UK, say coming tax hikes will close businesses and force them to fire staff. They argue the employee-heavy sector is uniquely threatened by changes to payroll taxes and that it has no capacity to pass costs on to consumers. It's a test of the Chancellor's pitch to be both pro-worker and pro-business. The hospitality sector is saying she is neither. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
And those are a few of our top stories for you this morning. Now, looking at the markets this hour. So in Asia, the Hang Seng tumbling more than 1.9%, currently down 1.8%. Underwhelming China fiscal stimulus has been the reason that index has been the main decliner this morning. Having said that, after last week, we have to think about some of the records notched up in the US. S&P 500 hit another 50th record high within a whisker of 6,000 last week, and stock futures this morning looking positive, also up by close to 0.2%. You saw $20 billion flowing into US equities on the day that Donald Trump won the White House. European stock futures are higher this morning. Cash treasuries, though, remember, are shut. There is a US holiday. Brent crude futures this morning currently down, and Bitcoin surging, as I said just earlier, close to $81,000 this morning, up by 1.2%. Those are the markets.
Well, in a moment, we'll bring you more on just how Donald Trump is lining up some key people in his new administration, and also the market's view of what his new administration might mean for them. But we've also been reading the latest Screen Time newsletter for Lucas Shaw, who's been looking at Netflix's move into live programming. Not, of course, something that we really know the streaming service for, but it's something that they're hoping to build a business out of, and particularly in their advertising front.
Yeah, well, that's what it's all about. Apparently, they're going to live stream some big NFL football games on Christmas Day, and it's not something that most customers understand that Netflix is doing. I mean, I just think it's quite funny, isn't it, that Netflix has sort of swept aside the old-fashioned TV networks and now almost bringing them back again.
And they're sort of just doing the same thing those TV networks did. It's all part of their play for more advertising. Of course, they brought in an advertising support service, but that still only represents a very small fraction of its customer base, whereas the plan is, with live programming, they'll be able to use more advertising. But Lucas Shaw has more in the latest Screen Time newsletter.
Now, let's get to the latest on how Donald Trump is preparing to take office in January. He's announced former Immigration Enforcement Chief Tom Homan as his, quote, border czar. And the Washington Post reporting that Trump has spoken to the Russian leader Vladimir Putin. Our EMEA news director, Roslyn Matheson, joins us now for more. Good morning, Ros. So the report says that Putin and Trump spoke last Thursday. This is hugely significant. What do we know? What do we know about what might have been said?
Well, there was some expectation this call would happen after Vladimir Putin congratulated Donald Trump on his election win. But as you say, the Washington Post reporting that call did occur, and Donald Trump, said to Vladimir Putin not to escalate his war in Ukraine. That's probably because he doesn't want the awkwardness of Putin escalating right as he comes to office, because as we know, he's quite keen to get a deal, as he puts it, to end the war. And it seems like they did talk about that, and that Donald Trump said he'd be interested in follow-up conversations with Vladimir Putin to talk about a pathway to end the war. And they briefly discussed land. And that's, of course, the key question. We know that, this conversation around a possible end to the war seems to involve the reality of Ukraine ceding territory. And the fact it was even on the table briefly in this conversation, according to this report, is significant. It adds to the view that, Donald Trump, when he sees what a deal is here, it means Ukraine giving up land in order to get this war to a close.
This happening conversation, of course, as we're getting the names of some of people who are going to be taking up important jobs in the Trump administration. A few names being announced just in the past couple of hours. Roz, talk us through some of the announcements.
Well, we know that he rewards loyalty above all. It's interesting to see that some names who were in his administration previously seem to be circulating again. It does seem that he's ruled out Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo for roles in this administration, but there's talk that Rick Grinnell, who is his ambassador to Germany, or Steve Mnuchin could be in contention for Secretary of State, which would be very interesting, of course. And you mentioned Tom Homan, who's coming in as what's known as a border czar in a way. And of course, he was the architect previously of a policy that saw undocumented children separated from their families and deported. And he said so far that he would actually change that policy to have entire families deported, so people are sent away together. But still, very controversial policy. And the use of the czar is interesting because it allows Donald Trump to appoint these people without the oversight necessarily of Congress, the House or the Senate. You have these czars who can run policy for a number of years, really, without a lot of guardrails around them. So the fact he's moving quickly in that front is also very interesting. And we know, of course, that he may nominate Elise Stefanik. She's going to be potentially the US ambassador to the UN, and she's been a Trump loyalist, very vocal one, for a number of years. So again, that thread of loyalty is running through all these appointments so far.
Ros, thank you so much for bringing us up to date then on the latest announcements on the Trump administration. That is our EMEA news director, Roslyn Matheson.
Let's turn next to how markets are preparing for Trump to take power. Last week's bond sell-off has abated, but major Wall Street firms are warning there's more volatility ahead. Our markets reporter Valerie Teitel is with us for more. Valerie, this is a good moment to think about this because cash treasuries aren't trading today because it's a holiday in the US. How are traders talking about, though, what they're expecting now from bond markets ahead?
Look, it's all about any hints that we get that the policies that Trump talked about in his campaign, he is serious about, right? So we're really looking at the picks that he has for Trade Secretary and Treasury Secretary for any hints on how serious he is. It was rumored, it was written in the FT, but later denied that his Trade Secretary pick of Robert Lighthizer, he is a big trade hawk, and that would imply maybe that the tariffs that he's been talking about weren't a negotiation start off, that he was really serious about putting them on. And then if we look over to what's been talked about in the Treasury Secretary pick, the key frontrunner right now for most in markets is Scott Bessent, who is very Wall Street friendly. He is a CIO of Key Square. He also dealt a lot with Stan Druckenmiller and the Soros's fund. He's seen as a positive Wall Street pick, and he's been out recently saying that any notion that Trump's policies are inflationary is, quote, absurd. He sees them as deflationary. And he was also talking about regulation that they could change some banking regulation to basically force U.S. banks to hold more U.S. treasuries, which could be a key driver for the treasury market coming forward if we do have another big buyer of the treasury market being a domestic U.S. bank. So that one is very important for markets to watch as well. Flipping over to the data side, we have CPI on Wednesday and PPI on Thursday. It's notable after that we do hear from Powell Thursday evening.
Yeah, absolutely. You just have to look at Bloomberg columnists to understand the thinking. You know, the mighty German Bund is losing its halo. Marcus Ashworth's been writing about that. Trump doesn't have to be bad news for Ukraine. Trump also will bury ESG. Those are some of the think pieces that we've got on the Bloomberg terminal this morning. In terms of the other question, though, that I've got for you, it's Bitcoin, $81,000. And we know that Trump is a big alt asset and cryptocurrency enthusiast.
Yeah, it seems like Bitcoin is not waiting for any further clarity. It is going for it, Caroline. Since the 1st of November, Bitcoin has rallied 15% overnight across the 81,000 level mark, up another percent so far in this morning's trade. So, Trump seen as very friendly to cryptocurrency assets, and then pair that with the fact that he's teamed up with Elon Musk, that seems very positive for cryptocurrencies generally. And we've seen Bitcoin, not wait for any further clarity, but take a leap higher on that.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.